So these notes are a continuation of our matter cycle notes, which is broken up into two videos, the carbon cycle and water cycle video, and this video, which is the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen comprises about 80% of our atmosphere. But every single breath you take, all of the nitrogen that you're breathing in, you breathe right back out again. Nitrogen is not taken in by the body through breathing. So you cannot use nitrogen gas, which, by the way, nitrogen gas is N2. You cannot use nitrogen gas directly. You cannot breathe in nitrogen gas and retain it. So, in order to do that, you must eat it. And in order to eat nitrogen, it has to be in some sort of compound form that's not N2. Common environmental compounds of nitrogen are ammonia, which is NH3, nitrate, which is NO3, and nitrite, which is NO2. And of the three, the one that we're going to say that most organisms, namely plants, like the most is nitrates. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. So how are these compounds made? The following are ways that atmospheric nitrogen, remember that's N2, is put into compound form. The first is lightning. Now that doesn't happen very often, but it is a way, due to the energy in lightning, it can cause nitrogen gas to bond with oxygen and form nitrates and nitrites. This first blank here is oxygen. And those two compounds, nitrates and nitrites, can combine with rainwater and end up in the ground. So that's one way that nitrogen gas can end up in the ground. The second is through what's called fixing. So I want you to remember fixation or fixing. Nitrogen fixing bacteria can be found in the soil, but they are found in great amounts in certain plants, namely legumes. And so when they are in the soil, and especially in legumes, they can take atmospheric nitrogen, remember that's N2, and turn it into ammonia, which is NH3. Examples of legumes are soybeans, peanuts, clover, alfalfa. There are others, but if any of you have ever heard of crop rotation, when farmers rotate their crops from season to season, it's usually because they grow something that sucks up all the nitrogen out of the soil, like corn, and so they need to replenish that nitrogen back. And the natural way to do it, back in the old days, was to rotate your crops so that you plant a soil or a crop that puts nitrogen back in the soil, like soy, and then another year go ahead and grow something that depletes it. Farmers still do that. They grow these legume crops to put nitrogen back in the soil. And I know that they're really hard to see, but there are these little nodule-like structures that if you were to break open inside of them, there are bacteria, and that's where the bacteria reside. And those bacteria, again, can take nitrogen gas and turn it to ammonia. The third way that nitrogen gas is put into compound form is more of a man-made and modern technology, and that's through a process called the Haber process, which turns atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia. and ammonia nitrate, which can then be used to put into the soil. Now, ammonia is not the most friendly compound for plants. So plants would rather have the nitrogen in the form of nitrates and nitrites, especially nitrates. So ammonia isn't typically used directly by plants. They prefer nitrates or nitrites. So the way that ammonia is converted to nitrates or nitrites is by nitrifying soil bacteria. And they can take ammonia and convert it into nitrites and nitrates. And that is shown down here. Now, what the heck is that picture? That's an electron microscope of soil bacteria that nitrify. Now, once you have those nitrates and nitrites in the soil, plants can readily take them up. They will then use the nitrogen in those compounds to make protein and other compounds like DNA, and then animals consume those plants, and then the nitrogen moves into them. So you are an animal, you get your nitrogen through consumption. All animals eventually, and plants, die, and when they decompose, or if they excrete waste, that decomposition or excretion process creates ammonia, which then returns to the ground. And again, this ammonia could then be nitrified again, which I mentioned above, by soil bacteria. Now, how do you get nitrogen that's now in the soil or in an organism and get back into the atmosphere? So you need to get back as a gas in order to complete a full cycle. And the name of the bacteria that do that are called denitrifying bacteria. So they are found in the soil, and they can take nitrates and nitrites and convert them back to atmospheric nitrogen. So that's shown here. These are, again, electron microscope images of those bacteria, and they would turn nitrates and nitrites back to N2. On the last page, you have an overview of essentially everything that I just said. What's left out is lightning is not mentioned here. Fertilizer manufacturing is not mentioned here. But you do have nitrogen fixation by legumes, and that makes ammonia. And ammonia is shown down here, which is then turned into nitrates and nitrites by nitrifying bacteria, which then is taken in by plants, and that's called assimilation. Plants are then eaten by animals, and animals and plants, either when they make waste or when they die, decompose. Again, that puts ammonia back in the soil. And then finally, nitrates are denitrified by additional bacteria to put the nitrogen back in the atmosphere. So that's it. That's the whole cycle. Thanks for watching.